Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh, what a week it has been here at Wakelet Community Week. We've had so much fun. There have been some incredible sessions that have happened this week, and there's still a few more left as well. We're here for the whole of today and the rest of tomorrow. So there's some incredible things happening, but I am so stoked for this session because the last time that we had the incredible Matt Miller in the house, it was a groundbreaking session. The numbers were absolutely incredible. We had so many of you from all over the world join, and I'm really excited for this as well because Matt has told me that this is going to be the first time that he's ever done this session as well, the first time he's ever done this presentation. So you're going to be hearing some fresh new ideas that have never been heard before, and I am just as excited as you are to hear what's been going on. And I can see that everybody's joining us from all over the world as usual. Please, with these sessions, we love people to get involved. So just, you're on YouTube Live, use the comment section, share your ideas, share your thoughts, and don't forget to share your comments on Twitter with us as well. So if you pick up any really neat ideas, if you want to capture any screenshots and share them with us on Twitter, use the hashtag Wakelet Community Week and you will be in with a chance of winning some incredible prizes as well. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my incredible friend, Matt. Take it away, Matt.
All right. Hey, thank you so much, Misbah. I really appreciate it. And hello to everyone. It's so good to get to spend some time with you all today. It's been fantastic already just to kind of flip through and see where some of you all are coming from. I'm seeing some familiar faces, some folks that I know, like I see Justine Wright, who I've bumped into at several things. Dalton Tedder's here. We've got folks from, all different countries, as I'm sure you've seen, from Malaysia, from India, from all different places in the United States, Croatia, Quebec, Canada. There's my friend Alexandra in the comments too. So I am thrilled to get to spend some time with you all, especially since I got to be a part of Wakelet Community Week last year. I was excited to get the invitation to come back. So anyway, it has been a year, hasn't it? If you think back to last year at this time, and even a little bit before this time last year, the world almost seems like it was in a whole different place. And the thing that I keep hearing from educators kind of all over is that a lot has changed. We've learned a lot. We've gone through lots of things together. And hopefully some of the changes for the good will stick. And so that's kind of what I wanted to dig into in this presentation today. And now we're going to be talking, the title of the presentation is Post-Pandemic Classroom, What to Ditch and What to Keep. That's kind of what I hear lots of people talking about, is now in light of everything that we've gone through all of this time, many of us have tried some new teaching practices. And so now it's time for us to figure out what's worth keeping around and what are some of the things that we don't want to keep. So that's really what we're going to be talking about here. So just like Misbah said a moment ago, I'm going to really encourage you to use that chat. I'm going to be throwing out some questions, sometimes on slides, sometimes just verbally. And that's one of my favorite things about doing YouTube lives like this, is that we can all interact in real time. So I'm going to be keeping my eyes on that chat. I see Mrs. T just said Indiana teachers rock. So I'm from Indiana here in the United States. That's cool to see someone else from my state. So just like I said there, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and I'm going to be shouting out a lot of the things that you all have to say. Let's really make this a conversation instead of a one-way presentation. What do you say? So let's go ahead and get those slides going on the screen. And we're going to be, like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about this idea of post-pandemic classroom, what to ditch and what to keep. And so I've got to ask you this question to kick all of this off. And I'm really curious to see what everybody's answers are to this. March 2020, where were you? I feel like with lots of really big events that have happened in history, the people who lived through them seem to have personal stories about where they were when those things happened. For instance, during the attacks of September 11th here in the United States, I remember being in a college classroom and finding out about what all was happening. And as soon as we found out, I ran up to the newspaper newsroom. I worked on the college newspaper and watched as the events unfolded. It's like everybody seems to have their own personal stories. And so if you've got a story like that, let me know. Tell us in the chat. Where were you when all of this started to hit and life started to change for you? For instance, Dalton said that he was, I just lost his. I think he said that he was on spring break. He says it ended up lasting for months. Looks like Camaraya says at home without students. So many of us, I think, ended up that way, of course, right? Wendy says on spring break that kept getting extended. I bet you can probably sympathize with that, or at least some of us can. Extended and then extended indefinitely, right? Like Wendy says spring break and not going back. Debbie Bourne says she was just coming back from the NCCE conference in Seattle. And that's kind of the way it was with me too. I had just gotten done doing a keynote speech at a conference in Utah. I was about to get on a plane and go do another presentation in Seattle, Washington. And I found out that Seattle, Washington ended up being the epicenter of the coronavirus when it hit here in the United States. So that scared us a lot. There's a lot that we didn't know in March 2020, right? And so there was a lot. We had to make decisions based on very small amounts of information. Jaina says March 2020 lockdown started in Indonesia, and I ended up teaching in a digital classroom. And so, all of us have these, all of us have these stories. Jan says, I was organizing the last international conference in Brussels, European Association Summit, and then 48 hours later, boom, lockdown, right? So there's that one right there. We just had Grace's comment come up a second ago, already teaching online, but found myself helping lots of other instructors unexpectedly finding themselves teaching online. And see, just real briefly as an aside, I felt like that was one of the things that made me the proudest of being a part of the educator community, is that everybody was so willing to give. There were so many people that were creating resources and sharing them, dropping things into Wakelets and passing them around. And even when everybody else was really struggling, we were still supporting each other because, we're educators. That's what we do, right? So for many schools, this was the reality. They were forced to, if you were like my kids' schools and my wife's school where, she teaches, they're forced to shut down over the weekend. It was like word came in on a Friday, hey, we're going to be going virtual indefinitely. Sometimes it happened overnight. Like you would get done at school and at the end of the day, they said, hey, grab your things. We're not coming back to this building tomorrow. Some people didn't even get that opportunity, and students didn't even get to go back to their, to get like their lunch boxes, their backpacks, their jackets. All of them are just still hanging there in their lockers. And we're stuck in this kind of disbelief, right? And here we are as teachers, right? We're going, oh my goodness, what in the world am I going to do? We were in this moment where we had to go from a Friday sometimes and totally transform the way that we deliver instruction and give that instruction over a weekend or overnight sometimes, right? Patricia says, that's what happened to me. They called to tell me that I couldn't go back. Just like, it's just like in a moment, in an instant, that stuff starts to happen, right? It was incredible. And then the public perception of what remote teaching was supposed to look like was frustrating at times and kind of comical at other times. I don't know if you all experience this too, but I think the public's perception of what remote teaching was looked kind of like this. They just assumed that at 8 a.m., all of the students were going to get onto their computers and they were going to log right on to a Zoom call or a video call. The teacher would lecture, the students would sit attentively and they would take notes. The teacher would write on the whiteboard in the background, and the students would all just sit there and they would all just listen, and they would keep eye contact and they would smile, and the students would stay on task, right? Amanda says public perception was that we were on vacation. Right, yeah, see, these are the frustrations. And then, of course, what people's perception was sometimes was not really what reality was, because reality kind of looked like this sometimes, didn't it? Can any of you sympathize? Tell us in the chat what your version of this ended up looking like. Lydia says that wasn't even the reality in face-to-face learning. Yeah, and for some reason, people thought that this was going to be the big change, right? So here's what it kind of looked like in reality. Like, you've got all of these students who you never see their faces because their cameras aren't on. You have one of them where the camera is faced at the ceiling fan, and so you see their ceiling fan just spinning around. The teacher saying, please tell your brother to put his pants on, because you never know what's going to happen behind some of your students. One of them wants to show you their cat. The other one is trying to talk and can't be heard because they're on mute. And then the kids are all reminding them that they're on mute. Like that was the slogan of the year 2020, you're on mute, right? Yeah, exactly. Like Carrie says, you're muted, like over and over and over again, right? Lydia says, do you see my screen? That was probably a good solid second, right? Yeah, so we all have those stories, right? And this was the reality for a lot of us. When we were tossed into the pandemic, and we tried to figure out how in the world we were going to do instruction remotely. The best analogy I can come up with is it was almost like we were out on a boat at night and someone threw us out of the boat. And so what's the first thing that happens if you get thrown out of a boat? You're underwater and you have to get back to the surface of the water. That's kind of the way that it felt whenever we got thrown right into remote learning with no preparation whatsoever. It was just that idea of, oh my goodness, I have to get something online by Monday. How in the world am I going to get something online by Monday? How will I do that? What will my class even look like? So, taking that back to our analogy, that's where we are underwater and we are trying to claw our way back to the surface of the water. Oh my goodness, this comment. I loved going from kindergarten where every kid is talking, showing me their missing teeth, stuffed animals, to fifth grade where it's silent and it's all of those black boxes. That's so totally true, right? So you get from that point where you're stuck, you're like underwater and you're thinking, I'm going to drown if I don't get that first breath of air. Monday comes, class happens online. It's not pretty, but it happens. And all of a sudden that is over and it's like, I can breathe again. But then the reality, if we're sticking to our analogy here, is okay, I just survived. I just got up out of the water, but now I'm stuck in the middle of the ocean. Where am I going to go now? What am I going to do now? And so you have to start to orient yourself toward the shore. And now that you've survived one day of remote teaching, now it's like, let's start swimming toward shore. Hopefully we're swimming in the right direction, but some of us had to course correct, right? And so then we're swimming. We're creating lessons online. We're doing the Zoom calls. We're doing things the best that we can. But then after a while, exhaustion sets in, doesn't it? To like complete and total exhaustion. And you're like, I can't do this anymore. And so that's where you go into survival float. I used to teach swim lessons. And that was one of the things that you had to teach kids early on was you had to teach them the survival float, where you either roll over on your stomach or you roll over on your back and you try to use as little movement as possible just to try to stay afloat. And so if you took moments to do that survival float, no shame on that, right? And so now we finally have made it to the shore. We finally swam into the shore. And so now, hopefully there should be some sense of relief at this point. But one of the realities that we found through all of this is that this is one traumatic way to learn how to swim, you know, but we did it and we got to the end of all of it. And there should be that sense of relief. But as soon as we start to look around at the news reports and we see the headlines, you start to see all of the negative press that comes out of this. And I don't want to be the one that even starts to minimize the impact of a global pandemic and all of the lives that were lost, all of the economic turmoil that we've gone through all of this time. It was awful. And so we're starting to see terms like learning loss. My friend Ken Shelton was tweeting about this, and he was talking about all of the problems, all of the issues with learning loss. And then my friend Holly Clark responded to it, and she said, hey, deficit language sells tests. You know, like that's what this is, talking about learning loss. It's deficit language, you know. COVID-19 impacts on student performance, pandemic-related disruptions to schooling. Like everybody's talking about all of the awful things that are happening to test scores and how kids aren't where we think that we're supposed to be, right? Like Stephanie says, we went from teachers are heroes to blame the teachers real quick. It happened fast, right? But I kept watching on social media. And if that was the screaming loud headline was, oh my goodness, look at how far behind everybody is. I heard this still strong whisper that said, some of my students are thriving. Some of my kids are doing okay. You know, it was kind of lost in the clamor of all of the panic. But there was that still small voice saying, hey, some of my kids are doing okay. And then you hear from other people, hey, I'm doing things I never would have done. And they're working. It's like there's this, you know, again, I don't want to minimize all of the pain and suffering and all of the trauma that's happened in these last year and a half. But some things are coming out of this, you know? And so instead of just trying to listen for those whispers, I just asked. I went out on Twitter. You know, this is just a tweet. This is just a tweet thread. That's all that it is. It's nothing, you know, more than that, but I think it's telling. And I just asked the question. I mean, it's just one little question. What parts of pandemic era remote teaching will you keep? It's kind of like working under the assumption that, hey, some of this stuff worked. We learned some things that are going to be worth keeping around, worth hanging on to. And so I wanted to know what some of those things were. So I've gathered together for you about 6 of them that are in the that I have some slides for that we get to kind of chat about. So what I'd love to be able to see, first of all, is I'd love to see in the chat, what are some of the things that you want to keep? I want to be able to kind of address some of those. In fact, I'd like to take a look at some of those before we get into my slides. I just saw this great comment, just now saw it. I don't know if it's been displayed yet by Lydia Krupp. She says, learning gaps were always there. The pandemic exposed how previous solutions weren't always working. See, it just like shines a light on what we were already frustrated about. And she says, now is the time to build on what worked and not regress out of fear around learning loss. Liddy, can you just come do my keynote for me? That's just like totally hit it on the head right there. I thought that was fantastic. You know, right below her, Obi says, I found that the quiet students in the classroom really thrived in the online format. Then there's differentiation. You know, we were forced to differentiate our instruction, weren't we? Because we couldn't be in the classroom to do some of it. We had to do it through remote teaching. So Mrs. T says differentiation. Some things work for some kids better than others. And giving them some of that flexibility, giving them some choice. Totally love that. Let's see. What's another good one here? We learned, Patricia says we learned a lot and they learned with us. Totally agree with that. Brian says, keep student-paced learning opportunities. You know, there was a lot of opportunity for that, especially since, you know, we didn't have eyes on our students all the time in the same way that we did before. We had to plan for student-paced stuff. You know, really remote learning was kind of, I don't want to say it was like designed for it, but that was one of its strengths, I guess. Stormy says, I will always have video conferencing opportunities for parents and students. Like, it's been fascinating to see how much video conferencing has evolved over the last year and a half. Just goes to show you how fast we can really innovate if we're pushed to do it. But then how much we as educators have taken on about video conferencing. And so now that we have those skills, we've got pretty good Zoom skills now, you know? And so if that's the case, where do we go with that? Stormy's saying she's going to have video conferencing opportunities for students and parents in the future. So, yeah, any of this stuff. If you continue to look down through the comments, you're going to see that there's lots and lots of good things here. You know, what's interesting is Tammy Meyer says some form of Zoom chat. You hear from students who you wouldn't normally hear from. And I found that, you know, it's interesting that she mentions that, because Tammy's not the first person that I've heard about that. I'm curious to see in the chat what some of you think about that. Like, a lot of us hated having to teach on Zoom, mostly because we were used to face-to-face. I know lots of people do online teaching on a regular basis and are really good at it. And students have, you know, are really successful in it. But if it's not our thing, a lot of us hated having to teach through, you know, Zoom or any video conferencing. But the chat, I know at first when we jumped into the chat, at first it was like, oh, the kids are just going to abuse the chat. I'm going to be so frustrated with the chat. All I got to do is police the chat. Can we just turn the chat off? I heard people saying that, you know. And then little by little, as time goes on, the Zoom chat becomes one of our best friends. And it's just like Tammy said, you know, having the ability to let students message us, to let students talk to us, and you know, give those little comments so that you can have conversation in class without students having to raise their hand, without them having to raise their voice, without having to be heard and judged in the same way as they might otherwise. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, this was one of the things that I want to keep. But the question then becomes, like, how do we do that? You know, oh, this is interesting. There's a comment from Boykin's Block, and it says, Zoom allowed me to include my parents into lessons when they were willing. See, that's another interesting thing, that it really did create opportunities that, you know, that we really didn't have before. Edward Vandesample said, gave the voiceless a voice. I thought that was fantastic. There's that one on the screen right there. Can we put that one back up on the screen? Because that one's good too. Students created solutions to various problems, became supportive to others, and truly grew as troubleshooters. My goodness. That was one of those things that came out of all of this that maybe we didn't expect. You know, they saw the issues and they helped become proactive parts of the solution, which I love, which is fantastic. So if you're looking at this right here, back channel chats like Zoom chat, and you're thinking, I would love to be able to do that, but I'm not going to teach on Zoom when I don't have to teach on Zoom. Are there some solutions? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely there are. Here's a tweet that came off of that, that thread that I started about what are you going to keep? And Sarah Campbell says, back channeling while teaching, hearing from so many students who are non-participants in the quote unquote, raise your hand to speak in class model. Constant feedback in the Zoom chat has been so great. And I'm so glad that she brought that up. Constant feedback in the Zoom chat. It's feedback for us as teachers to know where students are, but also to know what's working and what's not. Where before we might have just sat or students might have just sat and listened. So yeah, that I thought that was fantastic. So we've got a couple of options that are out there. And if you've got some options, if you've got some ideas, you know, definitely drop those into the chat as well. Oh, Suzanne brings up a good point. I want to highlight this real quick as we're getting to the tools. She says, chat is great, but students need to be taught how to be good chatters. Don't abuse it, use the proper language, etc. Yeah. I mean, it's just like any other digital space. And it's a place where digital citizenship lessons come into play. You know, how can we be good, kind, productive members of this digital community that we have. And I was just joking with somebody a little bit ago today that I wish that some of the parents could have some of those digital citizenship conversations that we have with the kids. I see parents and adults sometimes acting badly on social media without regard to other people. And I think, man, this is our opportunity. It's just like she was saying in the chat. If students learn how to do the chat in a good way, now all of a sudden we're bringing up hopefully a new generation that knows how to handle their business online and, create the kind of future that we really hope. So here are some of the tools that are out there. These are just 3 of them that came to mind for me. If you liked the idea of being able to type short messages back and forth with your students, or for your students to be able to type back and forth to each other, just depending on how you use it, back channel chat has been out there for a while, and that one's free. And I think that it's got a paid version, but the free version works in a lot of cases, and it really does in many ways replicate the Zoom chat or the Google Meet chat or the Microsoft Teams chat. So if you're not using another tool and you want to incorporate something like that into your live face-to-face classes, back channel chat could work. If you have slides that you're presenting, of course, Google Slides has audience Q&A built in. I'm pretty sure that PowerPoint has a version of this as well if you're using the online version of it. What's kind of nice about that is that they can submit questions, and then you're the one who gets to see them. And then if you click on one of them, it displays it up on the screen, which is kind of cool. So, if you... Again, different tools for different use cases. In this case, if you want to kind of like have a one-way channel of communication to you from students, that could totally work. And then, of course, you've got Nearpod and Pear Deck, which are 2, really good add-ons to, add-ons, lots of different ways to describe them. Basically, like gives your slides superpowers, and it makes them more interactive. So if you like that interaction, Nearpod and Pear Deck can let your students answer questions, type you messages, wide variety of things. So yeah, good stuff. Janice says, I loved being able to reach students right away in Teams chat. They use the chat, they don't use email. That's so interesting. I'm finding that more and more, email is kind of a thing for adults. And I'll be super curious to see, just as an aside, I'm going to be very curious to see what happens to email in business settings in the future, But anyway, and then Stormy brought up also Wakelet learning spaces are a great option for back channel chat, and students can create this. So I knew that Wakelet probably had an answer for this. I just didn't have it off the top of my head. I haven't learned as much about Wakelet learning spaces yet, so I'm glad that was brought up. That's cool. So that's one of them. Let's keep moving. Oh, and use Wakelet collaboratively. Oh, look at that. I did have a slide in there about that. This was the way that it made sense to me in my mind. I'm still learning about some of the features, but I know, you can create a Wakelet where people can contribute to it. And so if you set that up where students are contributors and we all put things together in the same collection, that does kind of go in the same direction, which is cool. So let's go on to the next one. Number 2. Online whiteboards. This was another one. I think video conferencing and online whiteboards were 2 spaces where the companies were forced to rapid prototype. They had to come up with new features. Sometimes they came up with entire new products on the fly because there was a need for them. And so, online whiteboards in some ways became teachers' best friends. And I'm curious to see, as far as the online whiteboards go, what you thought about that. Is that something that you're going to keep, and how do you want to use it? But with the online whiteboards, here's the sort of the evolution that I saw happen. I saw that a lot of times teachers who were used to face-to-face instruction were like, oh, I miss my whiteboard. Were any of you like that? That's totally me. When I taught high school Spanish, my whiteboard was my best friend. Of course, I wrote notes on it. But whenever we practice Spanish by telling stories, I illustrated the stories on the board with little stick figures and different things like that. And so I was drawing on my whiteboard all the time. Maybe as much as I was writing on my whiteboard was I drawing on it. And if I didn't have that whiteboard behind me to rely on, that was one of my very best friends. Isn't that funny how somebody who presents about and Mrs. McGregor says still using online whiteboards now that I'm back in the classroom. Yep. And that's the thing that I think is so fascinating about all of this, really. The online whiteboards, we started out trying to replace that tool that we used in the face-to-face classroom. We were trying to replace, that substitution. If you're familiar with the SAMR model, that's just basic substitution. I had a whiteboard in the background. Now I want a whiteboard on my Zoom call, and I'm going to do the same thing with it. But what's interesting, and Mrs. McGregor just alluded to this a second ago, is that once we got the hang of it, we started innovating with it. And so again, like Mrs. T says, she says, in-class whiteboards helped bond those large group discussions. See, at first, you might not have thought of using an online whiteboard to have a group discussion. But with so many of them, you do have collaborative features where you can all draw on the same whiteboard, and it does kind of facilitate those conversations, right? So yeah, with any of that, I'm seeing lots of shout outs to Jamboard too. Jamboard was a hero, I think, during remote learning. But then what you started to see was, like I said, the evolution. And so let me ask in the chat real quick. And Sam, if you see some good stuff from this, just go ahead and throw it up on the screen. As far as the online whiteboards go, how do you see yourself using that going forward? See, what I love about how some of them have evolved is that you can see the work of every single student like all at once. You can see all of them on one screen sometimes. You can pull up one individual one and take a look at it. You can comment on them. It's almost become like this really neat visual practice space where you can interact with students. Heidi says, I learned how to use Explain Everything with Google Slides to create interactive lessons for math. Keeping that gym moving forward, right? See, that's what this whole presentation is about. That's what we're going to share in all of this, right? Yeah, so that's fantastic. Edward says collaborate, brainstorming. Being able to brainstorm together in a space. So that's a fantastic way to do it too. Any of this stuff. Kimberly says analyze documents in a collaborative setting. You put that document into one of those online whiteboards, and you have multiple kids highlighting and underlining and writing notes next to it. It's so cool. Tracy says, absolutely. Immediate formative assessments, and often can be anonymous. So low risk for students, but high reward for teachers. Yeah, I know anonymous sometimes is scary for us as educators because we're afraid kids are going to abuse, but it also is sometimes the nudge that kids need to get that little bit of confidence to go forward and actually share. So yeah, any of that stuff. Dalton also said, allowing students to see multiple ways to solve math problems from their peers, not just from the teacher, but from their peers. So then it's not being pushed on the students from the teacher. And of course, when it comes to online whiteboards, you have lots and lots of options out there. Some people were talking about Jamboard, which was an app developed by Google to be kind of like an online whiteboard with sticky notes to be used with their hardware devices, their interactive displays that you hang on the wall that cost you thousands and thousands of dollars, or maybe just thousands of dollars. I don't know exactly how much a Jamboard costs, but it costs more than a book. It costs a lot. And that one has been available to lots of folks that have the Google Workspace. But some of the other ones, whiteboard.fi, whiteboard.chat, those were some of them that really, really came on that weren't used as much before. And then, of course, there's OneNote. Microsoft has been big in that space with OneNote for so long. And, lots of folks started using collaborative OneNotes in that way. Melissa says Jamboard will replace the old flip chart and Post-it note collaborative space or exit ticket space. Yeah, if you're looking for a digital alternative to that. Now, I will say sometimes it's nice to just be able to grab, a little stack of Post-it notes and to pull one of them off and write something and stick it up there so everyone can see. It's quick and easy, but having those digital spaces sometimes is really nice too, because you can capture those and refer to them later. Charlotte says you don't need to worry about capturing or saving the online whiteboard data like you do when you erase in-person whiteboards. That's so true. I remember I've written save next to things on my in-person whiteboard before so that the janitor won't erase it, but sometimes they do accidentally get erased because it happens, you know. So anyway, that's another one. Let's keep moving, shall we? Because I've got more to share with you. I love this one so much, and I think it's so important. Number 3 is to continue social emotional check-ins. I'm going to be watching the chat on this one because I want to see, did you do some of these? And this was so important during the pandemic, you know, to have those check-ins with students, because it's hard enough to be a kid and to go to class and to try to learn things that are hard and to struggle, to try to make, you know, social connections and to try to navigate friendships and frenemies and like all of that stuff. But then to throw on total upheaval to what school and what your day-to-day life looks like. All of that, I mean, it was just ripe for struggles with our mental health and our emotional well-being. And so lots of teachers started doing these social emotional check-ins. There's a good example of this right here. Rachel shared this with us in the Twitter thread I talked about earlier. She said she's just doing daily check-ins with students. I just mentioned a moment ago my friend Ken Shelton, who exposed me to this idea like years ago. And it's so simple, but it's so powerful. It's just providing students a space where they can privately tell you how they feel. And like this one says, is there anything else you'd like me to know? If not, feel free to leave this blank. No big deal. You know, I mean, even if you just have a couple of those real basic questions like that, first of all, it doesn't take students very long to fill it out. And secondly, you start to get a pulse of how your students are feeling, what their emotional state is for the day. Man, I tell you what, if I had been smart enough to do this earlier on, there are lots of days where I would have altered my course. And, but I didn't think of doing this. Stephanie says, allowing students to share what's going on in their world in a safe way, where they are not having to share in front of the group, was massive, right? I mean, it's so easy in the traditional school setting for kids to be not seen, not heard, lost in the shuffle. This is just one of those like personal touch points. And it also allows us to develop those relationships. Tammy says, one of my students said his favorite takeaway from my class was the reflections that I encouraged. There you go. It helped him recognize where he was emotionally and mentally. And see, to this point with this, we've just been talking about how it impacts us as teachers in our instruction. Tammy brings up a really good point here. That student said that it was a good reflective practice. His reflective practice was the big part of it, which I love. Gina says we had, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, we had a school-wide chart for teachers to make sure that we had a minimum of weekly check-ins. That's an interesting way of looking at it, like just to make sure that it's being done. I mean, you know, what is it? They say that if it's important to you and you want to make sure that it gets done, then there needs to be a metric to be able to find out if it's being done. And I think that's a fantastic idea. This is interesting. There's another one from Boykin's Block that says for elementary, to chat with friends in breakout rooms. For upper grades, gifts for students to pick how they were feeling that day. All gifts were based on what they were into. See, that's kind of a fun way. And these are two different ways of doing it too. The Google form check-in is all about privacy, just the things that you want to share with the teacher, just so you can be heard by one person. But then there's another whole side of it where you make it kind of a social thing as well. So, yeah. So this is yet another thing. If you weren't doing social emotional check-ins with students before, maybe you are now. And I know lots of teachers have seen that this is definitely something that they want to keep. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Student choice. Student choice. This was such an important thing during remote teaching because when you're not in the classroom with students, it becomes a little bit harder to figure out where everybody is, what everybody's interested in, and how we can kind of like customize that. And so I think it gave us lots of opportunities to practice that and to see how it can fit into a regular class. And, there are lots of places where student choice can kind of like play into our regular day-to-day classroom. It can be little things. I was just talking to my friend Gina Ruffcorn, who teaches 5th grade in Iowa here in the United States. Little bitty rural school, and she's real big on student choice. And she says sometimes it goes down to little teeny tiny things like, how do you want to complete this assignment? Do you want to, I can't remember exactly what she said. It was tough. Like, do you want to discuss this with a partner, or do you want to write it down? Just little things. And then she said, sometimes it goes big all the way up to what kind of a project do you want to do to show me what you've learned? Like, it gets to be big stuff too. So even giving students just like little bitty choices, little small choices, sometimes that can be really huge. There's someone whose name is Fabulous Class saying, I use choice boards. I think a lot of teachers have done that before, and I'm imagining that probably a lot of them will continue to do that. Choice boards are great because they do give students lots of options. There's sometimes a difference between using a choice board where you say, here are 5 activities, pick which one you want. But then there's also kind of like the choice matrix. I feel like I'm talking about old movies now, like The Matrix, but like a choice matrix where it says, okay, here are several different variables, and you pick which part of the variable you want throughout this. We're going to write. Do you want to be able to write longhand? Do you want to be able to type? Do you want to be able to speak? We're going to have a discussion about it. Do you want to be able to talk to an individual person face to face? Do you want to be able to talk as a group? Do you want to be able to talk digitally? Like if you kind of like have different variables all throughout, that's another way to give students choice. And then of course, the great thing about academic standards that we don't think about a lot of times is that sometimes they allow just enough wiggle room for student choice to come into it too. So Stephanie says, The Matrix is not old, Matt Miller. Do not age me like that. She yelled at me with capital letters. Oh my goodness. I got to watch it. You're right. That is not old. You're right. Yep. My bad. I apologize for that. So, and then Gina just said again, something as simple as pick the order you want to complete these. Yeah. You've got 4 things to do over the next couple of days. You pick the order that you want to go in. Makes a world of difference. Sometimes that's all that it takes, right? Here's another one saying, for many assignments, I give students a choice of going into a breakout room with peers to work, or stay in the room with me for further assistance. Or if they simply just want to work alone, giving them some of those options. And see, that gives them choice. But B, that allows, like feedback and help in a couple of different ways. I think that's fantastic. So, and then Wendy says, hey, guess what? You can set up individual choices in separate Wakelet collections. Just give your learners the links. Wendy's on it with the Wakelet suggestions. I appreciate you for that. So those are just a few of the things that I came up with off the top of my head. There were a couple of other ones that went through the thread that I thought were good. Like, James was talking about the mindset here, which I thought was fantastic. He says the mindset that no matter the age, subject, grade, teacher years of experience, any of that stuff, we can all learn and adopt new ways of doing things. Man, if our entire teaching corps around the world took on that mindset, if all that we went through pandemic era teaching led us to having that mindset and adopting that mindset, could you imagine the strides that education would take? It's incredible to just to kind of think about. A Zoom option for parent and teacher conferences. Who was just saying something about this a minute ago? So Marnie tweeted about this. She says, and more online tools instead of just paper and pencil. I've saved so much time on grading this year without having to search for worksheets and paper tests. So true. Now, I will also say, I don't know about you, but I am a big fan of paper and pencil also. Whenever I take my notes personally, so many times I'm taking notes on paper and pencil just because it's the way my brain works. It's the way that I kind of get things out. I've even seen research that says that if you take notes longhand, the way that you're elaborating and creating the words and creating the ideas on paper sticks in your brain in a different way than if you type them. So, Marnie says more online tools instead of paper and pencil. And I think that's good. But I also would add to that online tools aren't the complete and only answer, I don't think. And I think so many of us know that, sometimes just switching up modalities from typing on a keyboard to writing with some colored pencils or something, something like that switch can do so much for our brains as well. So yeah. And then Stephanie says that's why sketchnoting is a game changer. Yeah, totally agree with that. And Charlotte says, I can't wait to hand my students a physical composition notebook to complete work in. Like, it's those little comforts, isn't it, that we start to get back. And then we've got things like this that we learned that we want to keep, like sweatpants, but nice ones, the nice sweatpants. Because we all got pretty comfortable with sweatpants, I think, over the last year and a half or so, right? Want to see if anybody can back Ryan up on the sweatpants part, right? It's like those little comforts of for me, just staying in my flannel pajama pants and doing Zoom calls and stuff. So yeah, Amanda's like joggers with pockets. Yes, absolutely. So yes. Okay. So to this point, we've talked about some things that we want to keep. And again, if you continue to add some of the things in the chat, if you've got something that you haven't shared with us of something that you want to keep, like for instance, someone was just saying hyperdocs rock. Hyperdocs are these great sort of self-contained learning activities. Lydia, the first day putting jeans back on was a tough one, right? I think a lot of us can sympathize with that one. Totally agree with that. Judy says elastic clothes every day has been awesome. Yeah, it's awesome in some ways, but it's also kind of like if you get to wear elastic every day, it kind of is like not so motivating for our eating and exercise regimens sometimes. So yeah, I love this comment from Charlotte that she just put in too. She says videos can't replace good teaching either. Let me say that one more time for the folks in the back that may not have heard it. Videos can't replace good teaching either. Most students don't know how to teach themselves algebra by just watching a video and doing a worksheet. Sometimes people ask me, just because they're curious, they say, hey, do you think that technology will replace teachers? And my answer to that for the longest time has been a resounding absolutely not. We're the ones that have a heart, and we're the ones that can interpret what the student's situation is and how we can best meet their needs. And, I love what Khan Academy has done for making information available, but Khan Academy isn't going to lead us into the future. It's going to be teachers, so, and teachers do love sweatpants. We do love our sweatpants. Like Amanda said, with pockets, so anyway. Oh, I forgot this one was on here. She says paperless writing assignments. No more running to the copy machine last minute. Those copy machines, they smell fear. Do you all know what she's talking about? Those copy machines smell fear. And she said, I nicknamed ours Marley because it's always jamming. Oh my goodness. I thought that was hilarious. Had to include that one in there. Those copy machines really do smell fear, don't they? Right? Totally what we're talking about here. So what do we ditch? Are there things that, and I've seen some comments about this in the chat already, which I think is great. We've talked about all of these things that we want to keep, but the pandemic and remote teaching has also shined a light on some of the things that didn't work before. And they either make us see we can't continue doing this in the future, or we've seen things that we did during remote teaching and we think, I never want to do this again. Wow, check this one out. My pupil said that they were missing the school because they needed face-to-face contact with their teachers. That's exactly what we were talking about, wasn't it? That, that it's that face-to-face relationship. I know lots of students have struggled with this. This is a good one from Melissa. Videos are great for going back and reviewing concepts. They are, I agree, but nothing can beat the face-to-face interactions and relationships built in a classroom. Totally agree with you on that one. That's fantastic. Already starting to see some ideas in here about what we should ditch. Throw some of those things in there. Just keep throwing those into the chat. I wanted to share a few of them that I personally think that we ought to ditch. Here's one of them. And there's another one of those stock photos. You know, it's interesting when you look at stock photos are a way for artists and photographers to show us the way that they think the world looks. And when you start to look at those photos, you start to see that this is the way that the world thinks. This is the way that these artists think that the world looks. And here it is again. This is the way that education is perceived, especially when we were doing remote learning. This is what remote learning was in many people's minds. A teacher standing up in front of a class, leading a lecture from a whiteboard, and students sitting and quietly and attentively taking notes. And I'm not going to be that guy that trashes on the idea of lecturing from the front of the class, because sometimes it's efficient, sometimes it's effective, especially with those I bet you've seen some of those teachers that have fantastic storytelling skills, that are very charismatic, that can get their ideas across. But if this is our go-to thing, Zoom focused lecture, or even when we get back face to face, if it's Sage on the stage all over again, this is the kind of thing where if we can put things in the hands of the students, instead of doing teacher-centered instruction, doing student-centered instruction, right? Student-centered instruction. Before they disappear down the stream of comments, I wanted to call out some of these that we want to ditch. Amanda says, ditch some traditional methods and embrace student-centered learning. We were just talking about that with balanced approaches. Absolutely. What else have we got here? Maha Pervez says, lesson plan books, we've already ditched them. And see, I was just talking earlier about paper and pencil. I still love paper and pencil in some ways. So I've used paper lesson plan books, but there's nothing wrong with going digital on that. Then we've got from Sandy Kendall over here. Love following Sandy on Twitter. I followed her for the longest time. She says, ditch everyone doing the same thing at the same time. We don't have, I wish I could remember how this went. Somebody had this really pithy quote about how we shouldn't sort students based on their creation date, or I wanted to say they said expiration date, but I don't think that was it. But like based on their, based on their birth date, how do we sort students based on how old they are? There's some concern about that, right? So yeah, more good things in here. Let me keep going. How about this one? This was a big question that came. I think a lot of us that support teachers who are trying to make technology work for them during remote learning ask this question: how do I put this worksheet in a PDF? And see, when we start to look at it that way, and I can understand why they would ask that question. They were in that, if we go back to our analogy earlier of being tossed into the ocean in the dark, they were still trying to get to the surface of the water. And I get it. I get it. I know a lot of people would see this question and they would feel like they need to run off to Twitter or get on TikTok and shout at the top of their lungs about how disappointing this is. And it is. I mean, I'm disappointed in it too, but I also get it. However, if we have these fantastic devices in front of us, that schools a lot of times spend thousands and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars to put in the hands of the kids. We don't want to do digital versions of the same old thing, right? So then the question becomes, can I figure out what worked with this one activity? And how can I level it up a little bit? If I had $1 for every time that question was asked, right? I totally get that. Yeah, so any of that stuff. I think when we're willing to look at and see, I think that's what we've got to do as educators. We've got to take something like a worksheet and go, what is the redeeming quality of this? I have a hard time finding redeeming qualities in worksheets. Just saying. But No, that's not totally true. You do get repetitions with them. And there's something to be said for that. I don't want to just trash on worksheets, but I think we can look at it and go, what is the redeeming quality of this? And how can we do more? How can we do better with it? Let's go to the last one. This one's a little bit controversial, but I think that it's going to resonate with some of you. You ready for this? I put this one last on purpose because I'm kind of passionate about this one. Another thing that we need to ditch that we saw based on what we did through the pandemic, homework. I could go on and on about homework. The big resounding thing that I think I've taken away from, by the way, I wrote a book. I'm going to see if I can get it off of my bookshelf here with my friend Alice Keeler called Ditch That Homework. So it's probably no surprise that I'm a fan of getting rid of homework in general. One of the things that we found through our research about homework was that there isn't very much research about homework. No, that's not true. There is a decent amount of research about homework, but none of it is conclusive. Very little of it is conclusive. And some of the research that we've found shows that it is not as effective as we think that it is. I think that we say that louder for those in the back. Let's ditch that homework. No, I think that a lot of times as educators, we look at homework through rose-colored glasses and we think, look at all of these questions that these students are answering. They're going to get all of this extra practice. This is going to be like adding 20 minutes of in-class, instruction and learning, but it can be in addition to all the stuff that we were doing in class. Like they're going to go home and get 20 more minutes of instruction. It's fantastic. To which you got to go, I'm sorry, but human brains don't work that way. We have to have a time to recharge. B, we have to have an opportunity to, it's like we can't continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over again without some sort of variance to it. There's also the idea of, at some point we've got to sharpen our saw. I can't remember who that is. I think that's Stephen Covey that wrote about sharpening the saw. If you just continue to cut wood with the same saw over and over and over again, eventually the blade dulls and you have to sharpen it to get it back. That's called sleep. That's called disconnect. So yeah, I've said for the longest time, I really think that homework is one of those low return on investment activities. If you look at John Hattie's visible learning, all of the practices in that, homework comes in pretty low. So, all of these things. And this picture, I put this picture on here on purpose. It's another one of those stock photos. And again, here's that public perception of what homework is. And look at how ridiculous is this picture? Here's the student sitting with colored pencils, a ruler, a pair of scissors, and a pencil box and a textbook next to his notebook. And then there's mom snuggled in right next to him, watching over his shoulder. First of all, that would make me have all sorts of anxiety if mom snuggled in next to me and watched over my shoulder as I did my homework. And do you see those smiles on their faces? Everybody I've talked to about homework over the last several years since I co-authored Ditch That Homework has said that the look on parents' faces and kids' faces when they do homework is the exact opposite of this. There's no smiling. There's no enjoyment. It's usually a fight. There are usually tears. Yeah. Right here, overwhelming with too much homework, students feel stressed. We haven't even gotten into the stress part of it. Should look for better solutions. Yeah. Totally agree. Rachel Martin, try that with 3 elementary kids at home and all in tears, right? Exactly. So, yeah, Grace says, what universe is that picture from? I don't know, but I don't know what it's from either. Yeah. So how do we do all of this? We just talked about several things that we want to keep and several things that we want to ditch. How do we do all of it? I don't think that we arrive immediately. I don't think that it happens super fast. I will say this real quick. I wanted to throw this in here real fast. I would love to be a part of your journey on all of that. I do have a free email newsletter that I send out once a week, doing a little bit less over the summer, but I send out once a week with practical teaching ideas you can use in class right away. If you wanted to sign up for that, you can go to ditchthattextbook.com/101. if you sign up for it, it's also going to give you those 3 free ebooks that you see on your screen, including lots of practical ideas to use technology. It's got some free downloadable templates that you can assign to students right away, that kind of thing. So if you want to check that out, you can just click that link that they just dropped into the chat to be able to join. But when it comes to implementing a lot of this stuff, I found a quote from James Clear that I really liked. He wrote a book called Atomic Habits. And so if we're trying to evolve our practice forward, he says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. No single instance will transform your beliefs, but as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. Every action is a vote. So if you continue making votes for who you want to become and how you want to show up for students, I think that's how you get there. So that wraps it up right there. Hopefully that gave you some ideas, made you think. What really made me think were the comments, all of the things that were down here that you all shared. And so I thought this was fantastic. Really, really loved everything that you all contributed. And thank you so much for being a part of the conversation so that it wasn't just a one-way conversation. So all good stuff here. So thank you all so much for being a part of this. This was great. I'm not seeing Misbah jump back on here, so I guess this wraps us up. So thanks again for being a part of this presentation. Oh, there he is right there.
I'm right here. I'm right here. No, that was absolutely phenomenal, Matt. Honestly, like I've never seen in my years of being, a part of this community, I've never seen the amount of contribution and the quality participation that happened in that session then. I think that really resonated with our community so much. And honestly, a huge thank you for the work that you do. Like it's tireless. And, the things that you come up with, I think one of the most powerful things that I think about your sessions is that you talk about things that educators really wish that they could say, but may not always have the opportunity or the platform to. And, it's always powerful when that happens. Is there anything else going on as well, Matt, outside of Community Week that you're doing that you'd like to talk about real quick? I know that I'm saying this because I know that last Community Week, we had a technical issue where you got cut off way too soon.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's true. No,
I still get flashbacks.
Yeah. No, that's okay. No, I'm still constantly putting out posts to help people with practical things that they can get in that newsletter. Working on some online courses right now that you can find through my website. So if you want to kind of like learn with me on a little more formal setting where we can get kind of face-to-face and some videos, there's even some free courses in there too that you can go take and continuing to write books from time to time. There's 5 of them out there now. Tech Like a Pirate is probably the biggest one right now. And I presented on that in Community Week last year. So just kind of continuing to go forward with all of that stuff, but still love connecting with people on social media and, sharing things out through that email newsletter. That's probably the big one.
Thank you so much, honestly, Matt. And yeah, everybody go follow Matt on Twitter because, the content that you put out is super impactful. And, once again, with this session, honestly, the amount of ideas that were exchanged has been super inspiring and really, really I think set a new bar, which is really good. Set the bar super high. So please don't forget to share your ideas, your screenshots from this session with us on Twitter. Use the hashtag Wakelet Community Week. Tag Matt as well so that he can see what's been going on.
Please do.
And I appreciate you so much, Matt. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take you out the studio now so that I can plug our next session. But dude, that was absolutely phenomenal, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you. Wow, what a session. I'm speechless, honestly. That was incredible. I can't wait for us to have Matt on again. I know, last year's session with Matt was just as good, but there's so many new ideas and new topics to think about. And I think just, for me as well, from the Wakelet team, the way that we look at you as a community and the way that we try and get the way that we try and understand the struggles that you guys are going through. I think it's sessions like this that really highlight that as well. So it's an incredible part of Community Week for sure. I wanted to talk very, very quickly about the next session, which I will be on later on in the evening. I'm going to be talking with Yuritsa, and Yuritsa is absolutely incredible. We're going to be discussing culturally appropriate teaching. Okay, so this is a really, really important subject, and it's a lesson for teachers, because I know that so many of you have probably heard this phrase being spoken about online for, over the past year specifically. And like me, you may not really know that much about it, but it's really, really powerful. It'll have you thinking about the way that you teach your students in different ways, and it's going to be a powerful session. It's going to be raw, it's going to be authentic, and I can't wait to see all of you there as well. So yes, thank you all so much for participating in this session. Honestly, like, you guys made it. A massive, massive thank you to Matt as well. We've got so much more in store for you for the rest of today and also tomorrow as well. It's going to be really sad tomorrow when Community Week ends, but we'll deal with that. I'll deal with that emotional trauma tomorrow rather than today. But I appreciate you all. Thank you all so much, and stay tuned for more exciting things that we've got on for the rest of the week. Take care now.